Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to today's information session for on-demand transport. My name is Trish Sunga from Transport for New South Wales and I'll be your MC this morning. Before we begin the information session, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I also pay my respects to the elders, past, present and future, and extend that respect to any other Aboriginal people here today. Now I'll quickly run through some housekeeping. So firstly, if you haven't registered your details yet, please make sure you do so at the registration desk before you leave today. It's downstairs to the left outside the coffee shop. Since I am addressing a technology-savvy audience, I know everyone's got a smartphone. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that it is on silent. If you hear a whooping alarm sound indicating an evacuation, please move calmly to the exit at the rear of the room and we'll gather on the grassy area just outside. Today's session is going to be recorded to video and that will be made available to anyone who wasn't able to make it today. That video will go live next week on the Future Transport website and everyone who has registered will be emailed a copy of the URL. Now, this morning you'll be hearing from Tony Braxton Smith, Transport for New South Wales' Deputy Secretary for the Customer Services Division. Tony will go through what this exciting initiative means for Transport for New South Wales as an organisation. We'll then be hearing from Peter Andrews, who is the Project Director for the On-Demand Transport for Transport for New South Wales, and he'll go into more of the technical details of the expressions of innovation process. You will have the opportunity to ask any questions you have to Tony and to Peter, and we're also lucky to have in the room John Karaboulis, the Executive Director of Service Delivery and Performance for Transport for New South Wales, and he'll also be available to take any questions you might have. You'll then be welcome to join us for a light lunch and also an informal networking session. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here. Let's welcome to the stage the first speaker, Tony Braxton Smith.
Well, thank you, Trish, and good morning, everyone. My job, as Trish has said, is to give you a view of where this fits in the broader picture for Transport for New South Wales, and to give you some context and to give you the view from the executive table as to why we view this as a very important initiative and a great opportunity for those of you that have got innovative ideas about how to deliver future-focused transport services to customers. So, let me talk about where this fits in terms of our overall business opportunity. So those of you, and I know some of you in the room have already been a part of it, but we have on this year been going through what I would regard as a gigantic crowdsourced piece of thinking about what is the future application of technology to transport and how can we use these new and emerging technologies to deliver better customer outcomes. As we've characterised it, we see for New South Wales an opportunity to take advantage of all of the new technologies that are arising and emerging to transform our customers' experience, in essence, to personalised transport. So through the process of the Future Transport Technology Roadmap and its formulation, which is now out on the Future Transport website, you will see that we have identified 12 technologies that we see as driving a transformation in transport service delivery over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. Now, if you have a look at our technology roadmap, you'll see that we actually set out a number of scenarios, which is our effort at trying to capture what is the diversity of views about how technology might change the way that transport services are delivered between now and 2030. And we do see a number of different potential scenarios. One of those, with the rise of the autonomous vehicle and other associated technologies, is that the autonomous car becomes the king, or the autonomous vehicle becomes the king of the road. So the current ownership model stays in place, however, it moves to a much more automated platform. Now, some of you will realise that there have already been changes in the way that people consume, the concept of the collaborative economy, the consumption economy, driven by Airbnb, Uber and a whole bundle of other like technologies. So it's very possible, as we see it in the future, that there'll be much more a shared consumption model than in fact it'll be in effect transport as a subscription service and that ownership will fall away. And so that's a scenario we call we're all in this together. There's another scenario, because both of those scenarios are vehicle-based, And this particular scenario was brought home to us by what we did with a bunch of youth. We actually had a youth summit back in, I think, September, where we got 120 university students together to tell us their views of how transport might evolve over the course of the next 15 years. And they gave us some very clear feedback that, in fact, you could see transport evolving where there's a lot of investment and development in public transport, and so that the vehicle falls away, the private vehicle falls away in its importance, and that you have a lot more what you might call super commuting with public transport, shared services and active transport. And then the fourth and final scenario is simply that new technologies that arise, technologies such as e-learning, e-health, a bunch of other technologies that bring services to us where we live, might actually reduce the demand for overall travel. And so demand might fall away. So we've had a look at the emerging technologies, the 12 that we think are going to have most impact on transport. We've visualised 4 different scenarios, and out of that we've set for ourselves a set of strategies which we want to focus on, which are technology-enabled strategies that will help us to deliver our objectives, which are transforming transport and personalising transport for our customers. And I just want to take you briefly through those 5 strategies. The first one is to personalise the customer interaction. So using platforms that we've been recently developing, like Opal, like the platforms that support our apps, open data, the feedback platforms that we have, and other platforms of a similar nature that our customers use to engage with us, is to simplify and make it simplify the task of engaging with transport and transport information, and make it personal for our customers. The second one is there's a lot of new technologies that are arising that will help us to automate the mass transit network, make it a much more automated system, and again improve its efficiency. So our second strategy for Transport for New South Wales is transforming the mass transit network. The third one, which is the one that we're here to talk about today, is fostering shared demand responsive services. We see in the future a great opportunity space between what is today the rigid bus service, a 50-seat bus or sometimes a bigger articulated vehicle, and the taxi or the Uber vehicle. There is an opportunity space between those 2 anchors in what we know today. And that's what we're here to explore. And one of our 5 technology-enabled strategies, as it says on the screen, is to foster shared demand responsive services. The fourth one is about enabling connected and autonomous vehicles. Connected and autonomous vehicles have reached the peak of the Gartner hype curve, but it's very clear to us that they are beyond the research and development phase. They are now moving into early pilots and trials in various jurisdictions. We've taken a view that it's not our job to actually forecast when they'll come, but rather to prepare our environment to enable early trials and adoption to get benefits for our citizens. So fourth of the 5 strategies is to enable connected and autonomous vehicles in this state. And then the 5th one is to create intelligent transport networks that are managed with data. And this is the area where we make much greater use of all of the data sciences that are emerging, artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced analytics, and that whole kind of ecosystem of disciplines and practices around data to actually help us to make better informed decisions about the network, but also to help us to aggregate demand and manage supply. So data-driven solutions are very much a part of our forward thinking about how we use these new technologies to customise transport for our customers. Now, we've also given consideration about how we go about delivering this new world. So we've laid out a roadmap, which is our technology roadmap for transport, but we've also actually kind of taken stock of how we do business. And again, this process today and the process that you'll go through here is very much in the new paradigm. And we've put just a few things, again, if you're interested in the detail of it, it's online. But in our roadmap, we've set out how we are going to engage externally and how we're going to behave internally to deliver our technology roadmap. And there are some distinct differences to what you would call the traditional way of transport doing business. So those of you in the room that do business with us because you've bid for contracts, be aware this is designed to be a very different process. So First of all, we're talking, and I won't go through each of them, but we're looking for a bias, what we call sometimes a bias for partnering. So collaborating with industry and other experts and not being definitive or prescriptive about the solution we want, but rather specifying more of the problem space that we want our partners, our potential partners, to work in and put proposals to us that we can then work on together to deliver better outcomes for customers. To start on the basis of proof of concept or early trial before we think about scaling up. And then us as government being much more an enabler and an incubator and a collaborator, and not necessarily a specifier of a requirement that someone has to adhere to rigidly at a low cost in order to win the job. So those are a few things around this process. And again, I'd encourage you to go and get a copy and download a copy of the Future Transport Technology Roadmap, to give it its official name, and read in that document, because this is one of the early initiatives that comes out of that roadmap, because our colleagues, JK and our colleagues, have been working proactively alongside us to identify things that we could actually do here and now to make our next steps. So let me talk about our next steps. We call them our next steps no regrets initiatives. Now, why do we call them no regrets? Not because they're dead certs, in fact quite the reverse. They are us piloting and trialling new technologies, but they're no regrets because irrespective of any one of those four scenarios that I've just described to you earlier, these investments add value in terms of shaping the transport system of the future. So that's why no regrets. So it's always great in technology roadmaps and in technology space to provide these grand visualisations and the forward look, but it's actually what you do next that counts. And so in our technology roadmap, we've been a lot more specific about what we do next. Now, I'm not going to go through each of them, but again, if you go to the roadmap, you'll see that in each of the 5 strategies, we've kind of identified 3 different problem spaces or opportunity spaces where in 2017 and beyond, we are going to focus in delivering concrete initiatives, pilots, proof of concept, and if successful, scale up. In each of those work streams, we've got 3 problem spaces, and we're defining now a portfolio of initiatives. In the space of fostering shared demand responsive services, as you'll see there, trial on-demand transport services, that's what we're here for today. And you'll see there we've also said more broadly we're going to incubate new ventures in shared services and shared mobility services. So why this focus? Why this focus on flexible transport? So if you stand back for a moment and look at New South Wales Government and where we've been coming from for the last 5 years since Transport for New South Wales was established, we have a major investment portfolio in new mass transit networks. You only have to look around or watch the telly if you've seen our ads about tomorrow's Sydney to know that we're digging the joint up. We're building a new metro, we've built the South West Rail Link extension, we've just opened Wynyard Walk, we are building light rail networks. Everywhere you look, we are building more transport infrastructure to meet the service needs that our communities want. But if you look at overall the transport solutions that are around and have a look in the space of the bus services we provide, you'll see that we actually, in the greater Sydney metropolitan area, when you take into account the outer metropolitan areas, that we've actually got over 1,000 bus routes, and we're providing tens of thousands of services daily. And bus for us is actually a very flexible form of transport. We can move it, change it, switch it on, increase service, change service patterns relatively quickly and easily when compared to the other modes such as rail and light rail. So it's very flexible for us. But we need to focus on how bus plays and how those flexible services play into the future, rather than making assumptions that it will just be a continuation of our current form. And if you look at the document, you'll see there's a couple of particular areas that we're focused on, and particularly in our Future Transport Technology Roadmap, we're looking forward and saying, well, the mass transit network will exist in the future, but the first and the last mile connections to and from mass transit hubs, there are a range of possibilities as to how they might develop. And we're particularly interested in this trial, in this space, in what services might be able to be developed and trialled that enable customers to connect on the first and last mile to the mass transit hubs. It's also a reality that in this environment, because we are very geographically spread out, that there are a number of areas in Sydney where we have services, local trips that are not well serviced by public transport services. We've got other regions where we've got suboptimal service patterns because there's a, putting on a 50-seat bus doesn't necessarily meet the local demand pattern well, and we've got poorly patronised routes. They're all interesting areas for us to look at exploring flexible transport solutions. So those are the particular spaces when we put out this RFEOI that are in our minds. And again, I think the document gives you clear guidance, and I know Peter's going to tell you more about that in a minute. The key considerations for us are really going to be around 5 different spaces, but unlike, again, the traditional bid process, we are quite open about this. We are saying broadly, well, we want to understand how these solutions would benefit our customers. Our customers want more frequent service, reliable service, flexible service, when they want it, where they want it, to help them connect. We need to think about the services that you offer, ultimately, in how they affect the public transport network and how the network might reshape if those services scale up and are broadly successful. We want to understand about your delivery approach. How would we work together? And what value does your proposal offer to government? And then finally, and obviously, we're characterising this as a trial. They are trials for us, but we want to understand through this what is the potential to scale and what is the long-term opportunity. So those are the key things that we're going to be looking at through this process. What I want to do now is hand over to Peter Andrews, who's our project director, and he'll take you through more of the details of the RFEOI. Trish, you're going to...
No worries, Tony, thank you. I'll just introduce Peter by giving you a bit of a rundown of how this is going to work. So in the theme of innovation, we're going to run this session a little differently. As any questions come to mind, rather than holding on to them until the end of the presentation, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll get one of the roving mics that are at the back of the room out to you, and you can ask your questions as they come to you. Hopefully that's going to foster more of a better flow of ideas for this session and hopefully get you a better outcome at the end of it. At the end of it, Peter will also open the floor to any further questions you might have. And just another little bit of housekeeping, if you could please state your name and your company before you ask your question, that would be great. Thank you.
I know you might be a bit disappointed that I'm not going to read the EOI to you and go through it in great detail. I'm going to assume that you've all read that, you've all had an opportunity to look at that. And so I've got a few slides that will give a context, but what we want to do is foster a conversation. How is this going to work? How do we see it happening? What are the questions you have that we need to address? And hopefully that'll then flow through to a better way of doing it rather than just, you've read the OI, I think we cover off all the things. Tony's introduction gives you a good context of what we're trying to achieve. The OI gives you a whole lot of details and gives you the objectives. Now, one of the major things you'll notice different about this than others is we haven't structured this to make it easy for us to evaluate. We've tried to structure it to make it easy for people to suggest innovation. So that's going to create some problems for us at the end because we're going to get all sorts of ideas and all sorts of contexts, but we were trying to eliminate any restrictions telling people how to give us the answers, what to do, so that all is fine for us because we can then go through an evaluation process and check it all off nice and easily. But if we're trying to get innovation, we want to allow you to answer the objectives. So this is about, we're trying to set up a scene of what we want to achieve in a broad picture, how we can achieve it, and then allow you the freedom to offer it. So I'll go through this. It's about generating ideas. You're not limited to one idea, present lots of ideas. Now, when we get to the timeline, we'll talk about what a challenge that's going to be on our side and for everybody. The other thing too is different here is we want to work together to develop solutions. We're not going to sit here, send out an OI, and the next time you see me will be in a negotiation room or something. It's about working together because pilots will only work if we can really work together to work out some solutions. And as Tony said, this is about the future, and in the not too distant future, this will translate into contracts. and into services and into the future of what we're doing. So, go anywhere. Oh, can you just, don't know what's going on. So just by way of just general context, we've all seen the, yep, that's what I was trying. We've all seen the impact of what changes in transport are happening here and around the world. And so we want to explore some different models for providing cost-effective transport. So it's probably things with rubber tyres, but you know, we're not trying to limit anything here. We're trying to look for solutions that'll work in any way. And we're looking for the whole journey. So the whole journey from beginning to end and back, and how you get from door to door to door or whatever, so that we're thinking about the decision a customer makes when he leaves the house and how he's getting it home. We want to cover the whole journey. And transport traditionally is aimed, in mass transit is aimed at frequency. Customers want frequency. But do they really want frequency, or do they just want a service to be there when they want it? And so maybe there's a better way to deliver frequency more efficiently without running empty services back and forward. And we need to think about the way customers make decisions. The other thing, of course, is mass transit largely tends to be aimed at getting to and from work. Buses largely carry many, many passengers who aren't going to work. And so a large part of our customer base isn't that. And so do we really link them? And so the other thing that Tony mentioned is the flexibility that buses have. That's a good thing, and that's a curse of the system, where a service tries to do everything. It tries to go to close to home and get someone to a destination. And then it's not timely, it's clunky. So we're trying to look for some ways of, and so what that does, of course, is that then means that these things do impact the network in the long run. So we're looking to run some pilots in a specific way at the moment on top of a network that's running, but in the long run, those services that run and they will be impacted in some way. And so this is the beginning of a look at the network. And so we're trying to understand what we can do that'll help that process and help inform that. Okay. Any questions, just go. Happy to do it. So in the outcomes, we've tried to express outcomes and the evaluation criteria at a level that gives you an idea of what we're after. But I just want to be clear, if we knew the answer, we wouldn't be doing the pilots. So we're looking for innovative solutions that will challenge the way we do things and challenge established thinking and give us better ways to do it. So we're not here to tell you, here's what we want to achieve, because why run a pilot if we know the answer? So if you can come up with something truly innovative and interesting, then we're going to give it a go. So we can run up to 10 pilots if we get the right ideas, but we're not going to run 10 of the same pilot. We're going to run different things. So we're going to trial different things across the network in different locations, different areas, and try and truly get some good ideas. So we won't know some things are a good idea at first. They'll be just interesting ideas we're going to explore. So the challenge for us is to try and generate a number of options where we can go back to the strategy and say, here's some ideas that'll work. Now, as I said, we're trying not to be prescriptive. We're trying not to prejudge what the solution is. We're trying to allow the industry to help us solve the problem. And we think that in this room, there's a whole lot of people who can help come up with ideas that we just haven't thought about, or ways to bring things together. So, got a question?
Yeah, sorry, my name is Jessica Lovestead, I'm from Uber. So in the context of trials, because obviously, scope and width and breadth of those, what are you thinking in terms, I mean, we've seen the EOI and we've seen the kind of timelines when you want to have something in the field, but I guess in terms of cost and overall length of running those trials, what is the thinking there? Because obviously if you're doing a proof of concept, could run something for 4 weeks, we could run something for 4 months, we could run something for 4 years. The evaluation strategies around those would obviously be significantly different. So can you give us an indication on kind of the rough timing that you'd see there, and is less more, or is more, so to speak?
Yep, and we'll show a timeline and things later, and we'll cover these. But clearly, one of the challenges, of course, is it can take a long time for people to take up these sort of processes, and so running pilots for short times creates a challenge. So one thing is the initial pilots will be for 6 months. Then we want to work together on developing the pilots, and then there's up to 3 more 6-month periods for the pilots. So that gives us a length of time to which to explore, maybe fine-tune, work through and see how things work. So, but we understand that the challenge of that is, are people going to change their decisions on how to use transport in that time frame, and how do we work through that? And I'll come back to that a little bit. So, but initially, that's the idea. So there could be an initial pilot of 6 months. Some might fall away, some might be generated or changed, and then up to 3 more 6-month pilots. Okay. So, if you've got any preconceived ideas about conservative government approach, conservative transport approach, we're here to take risks. We're here to give it a go. And so don't limit yourself to the way things have been done in the past. We're trying, hopefully by the way the EOIs come out in the context, it shows you we're trying to do things differently. So please don't be limited by preconceived ideas of what transport has in the past expected and the way they've evaluated things. This is about challenging and moving and changing the way this happens. And there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to improve that. There's 20% of the network out there is running with a really high cost per passenger. We've tried to provide the data in the data room. The reason for the confidentiality in the data room is just issues on availability of that data. But we're trying to provide information to see where people are travelling. But there are people who are not travelling. You need to try and get on top of that. We'll try and provide more data as we go along in terms of vehicle movements and that as well that'll link into what we're doing. So, what's in it for the market, I think was important, and I think we've largely covered it off, is this is your chance to be part of the future. The results of these pilots will change future services, and so they'll impact directly on services in certain areas, but they'll also indirectly, as I said, impact the whole network. If you put an on-demand service on, it must impact other services that are running if you're going to run an efficient network. You know, we need to, there's a better ways of doing it. I think in the past, there's been failures of flexible transport, and I think a lot of the times there's been incorrect evaluation in terms of cost and benefit. And so we're looking to improve the services to customers, and we're looking to do it in a cost-effective way, but we think there are much more creative ways to deliver those services in a very efficient way. And it might, we need to work through how that can be done. And we don't want to limit options on how people approach, how people pay for those services, and what sort of models. Tony mentioned that we've got point-to-point here and we've got mass transit here, and there's a whole range in the middle. And that range actually is a cost range as well. Point-to-point's more expensive, transport's down here. There might be some options in the middle we can explore, as well as just doing the public transport a bit better. They're all open. Okay.
I'm Bernard Cheong from the Singapore Mass Rapid Transit. Just a question about, and perhaps it's best if I, ask it via an example. So, assuming if Company A was awarded or perhaps selected to do a pilot, as in the case of, say, providing end-to-end transportation in a particular region, and that Company A had a brilliant idea, a fair amount of IP, intellectual property, going into the solution. What is it in the future when, is there some form of exclusivity in the sense that this pilot would then be replicated in other regions, and would company A be given the exclusive rights for future contracting?
Okay. Yep. So one of the things you'll notice in this EOI is there's no contract form. Usually, when you see a transport kind of RFP or something go out, there's a contract already there saying here's what we're going to do. We were mindful that we don't know what the contracts will look like until we understand the pilots. IP is an important part of that. If people have an idea that they own today and it's protected, then we don't want to get in the way of that. But clearly, if people are just presenting ideas that are out there in terms of general ideas on transport, we want to be able to use those. So we need to work with everybody to work through what the right answer is on that and how those things work. Because if someone has an idea that's already owned, we can't, we don't want to take that, we can't take that off them. But it's equally, if they're just a move on a theme and an idea that's out there, then clearly we want to use it in other spaces. So the reason we don't have a contract format is there will be varying contracts depending on the context of the idea and the solution. And we'll need to work with everybody to do that. So there are a number of moving things in that contract that could happen, and so we need to be flexible. I'll come a bit later to interactive sessions. We'll have a bit of an idea. We'll sort of set up an MOU type thing, I think, at that stage to sort of set the scene of what we're trying to do to work with everybody. But we have to be flexible enough to deal with the circumstances individually, depending on what we're being offered, and whether that's something we want transport to apply anywhere, or whether it's IP that we need to use in solutions elsewhere. Okay. So, just a few. Sorry.
Sorry, Peter. Campbell Mason from Keolis Downer. A couple of questions, if I may. Just one specific one, picking up on the point about payment systems and the text that's in the EOI document about user-friendliness. And it's suggested there that proponents need to consider how we would deal with passengers who don't have access to non-cash payment systems. Is it a must-have that a successful proposal would actually have a solution for how we deal with passengers who can only pay by cash, or is it really a case of, look, we're piloting the technology-based bit, and if we can get a successful pilot going there, then after the event we need to come back and work out how we deal with that other category of non-technology enabled passengers?
So I want to make sure I get your question right. So, yeah, I mean, we don't want to. We clearly don't want to limit this process to Opal. Opal's possible, of course, on services, but an end-to-end process that's easy for customers. There's a whole lot of solutions emerging that are better solutions. So what we're hoping to do is try. So a pilot can pilot a certain aspect of the services, or we can work with people through the interactive processes to put ideas together as well. So we're willing to work on any of those sorts of options, but certainly we're not eliminating pilots already on their only part of a solution because it might be a really good idea. So we're trying to be as expansive as we can, as open as we can to ideas, and then work through the best ones. So if one has the whole solution, it might be better than one that doesn't, but the one that doesn't might be a different idea. So it'll be a case by case. Did I get your question right?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you very much. The second question, if I may, was just on the process, noting that the EOI document requires proposals in February with contract award in July. I'd just appreciate if you could clarify, are you looking for fully developed proposals by February as opposed to just a submission on here is conceptually what it is that we would work towards, and then you would sort of shortlist some where there would be some ongoing process between February and July to put flesh on the bones, and then have a more fully developed proposal prior to contract awards in July?
So the process we want to set up is one where we work together to get to the outcome. And I think the time frame would be a challenge if we were looking for the whole thing to be ready in February. We want to start implementing as soon as possible because the future contracts are not that far away, and so we need to start to understand. And so we want to work with people to do the best solution. So when we've picked the pilot, we can then work on how that gets delivered in some detail, but we need to understand what it is we're piloting. So we need enough to make sure we know that's the pilot we want to do, then we are willing to work together to fine tune. Because when I get to the timeline, the challenge would be potentially look at the room, we could get hundreds of ideas, and so we're going to be a challenge if we're going to have interactive sessions and work through. So the timeline's going to be a challenge, but how we can meet the timeline and still work to a solution will be important.
Thank you.
Tony?
Sorry, I just want to jump in to clarify a couple of things there. You'll need to assume during the trial that you won't be able to use Opal as a payment mechanism. The system, if you'd seen the strategy very briefly, we do have a forward strategy to develop it as a broader mobility payment platform, but the timeline of that does not line up with the timeline of this particular initiative. So you'll need to come with your own payment solution, however you wish to structure that. And every concept that comes forward will be considered, but obviously the more concise and well developed your proposal is, the more likelihood it will have of success. There's always a lot of detail to be worked through in this, and I don't think anyone expects that we will receive a fully formed proposal capable of immediate acceptance, but we do need genuinely well thought through, considered proposals here as a starting point for the conversation that Peter's talking about.
Thanks. So the project scope, just in geography, we're looking at Sydney Metro and outer metro areas. We're not looking at rural and regional. We're not looking at school services. We're looking at route services. And we're not looking at community transport. So it is route services in Sydney and outer metro. Tony's slide covered off these major areas of where we think there's interest. We're not saying this is a total list. It's a guide. I think it's a pretty good guide of the sort of things that are important. But we don't want to limit anybody's thinking to anything that we can do to improve transport. So I think just thinking about the way these things work, just remembering that the way on-demand services will work will be quite different in different areas at different times of day, night time, peak, off-peak, and I think all of those need to be explored. And so thinking about passenger journeys and how we link to mass transit, how we link people in communities, how we link services, and how we do things. And as I said, I'll give you some say examples. Some services today are very circuitous at the beginning and then run a really long leg somewhere. Is that really the best way to do that sort of thing? We link people to, we might have a service that's very direct to the city, and we might have it links to a station somewhere away, but does it link to the best station, the best link to get to the city? There are examples where those sort of things aren't done as well as they probably could be if you're looking at certain trips. And we need to look at where people want to go from certain areas and how they get there, and get better at that. The people are driving from home to stations, home to shops. Can we get some of those people into this system without needing a car? And that's happening all day in different times of day, and there's quite a few different solutions that emerge from that. Sorry.
Good morning. My name is Damien Beverdot. I work for Giro, a French-Canadian company, so sorry for my accent. You mentioned in the services out of scope the disability services. does that mean that we could not optimize in the same area door-to-door trips for disabled people and stop-to-stop trips for non-disabled people?
So within the geography we're doing, if we can move people from one location to another, then that's great. We're not particularly looking at disability, so and we're not looking at rural and regional, which has got a lot of that. But if the solution supports people, then that's great, and that could be part of the solution. But
sorry, because you, just a clarification, just disabled people will be removed from this project, or they could be part of them?
Look, if I could just clarify, there are a certain number of schemes that we have here where we provide funding subsidies for certain services, and TTSS is up there, the Taxi Transport Subsidy Scheme. These trials are designed not to cut across those existing arrangements. As to the market that you seek to serve, that is up to you as to how you design and put a proposal to us. But I think, in essence, what we're saying is there are a set of services that have been established, there are established providers, there's established funding arrangements. We're not touching that in this particular set of trials. Does that help? Okay.
And sorry, I had just a second question about the scope. You mentioned in the document that it is expected that the majority of pilots will run alongside existing services. Could we end up with a competition between an on-demand service and a regular service?
So the intention is not to change current services. So the pilots have to operate in an operating environment. So at the moment they will keep running, and so we'll have to work out whether that pilot can fit in there and work, and how we measure it. So we'll talk about the measurement later, but so we have no intention of reducing current services that operate. So the pilots will sit on top and work through that. Yeah, okay.
Hi, Peter. My name is Juan Carbonell with Raw Match Software. Just another question around that community and disability services piece. There are existing providers out there in the field in the Sydney metro area, Wollongong and Newcastle, that are already providing community transport services but are hungry for additional business and additional revenue streams. Can those vehicle pools or those services also be tied into this pilot?
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
Barry McDonald from Red Bus. I don't think you, from my perspective, answered the Disability Discrimination Act and its abhorrence of alternate services. I can well remember these arguments, industry Australia-wide, throughout the 90s. Can you give us basically an understanding whether these pilots have to be disability accessible, or basically we'll get an exemption?
So there's no exemption to the Act, and so we have to comply with the Disability Act. So the evaluation criteria are spelt out in the EOI. As I mentioned before, we're not going to run 10 pilots with the same idea, so a critical part of this evaluation will be looking for a number of ideas. So we'll be looking for the best. If there's a number of ideas that are similar, we'll be looking for the best. As Tony said, probably the best developed of one might win, but then we're looking for some other ideas to trial, or it might be the same idea in different geographies to see how they work. But we have to be flexible to trial different things. And so the evaluation criteria here is picking a number of different solutions, and the best of those solutions and the best made up solutions for us to go with. So it's really important that you think through how you can help us run a successful pilot really quickly and really efficiently. And as I said, the competition will be, clearly there are going to be a lot of ideas that are similar. We're going to pick the best one. And then we're going to pick different ones to try and get a mix. And we say up to 10 because we don't know how many until we see how many good ideas we get, how many are worth trialling. Now, when you're doing your bids, it might not be clear. You're not limited to how many ideas you can put forward. So you'll be limited on your ability to generate them up, but we're not looking for you to just put one idea up. If you've got more than one idea, give us more than one idea. So you could, so feel free to bring your best ideas to the table and they'll all be evaluated. I'm sorry.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up question, Jessica from Uber. In terms of funding envelope for the different trials, is there any, excuse me if I missed this because I was a little bit late, is there any indication of that in relation to the different kind of scopes that you're looking at trying to achieve?
So, sorry, you're asking about Transport's commitment of funding? Or?
Correct, yeah, and also I guess, you know, goes back to the whole scale aspect of things, if it's small and distinct geographic area, but just to get an indication of kind of roughly what you guys think of as a nominated, I wouldn't say per trial scope, but kind of a rough estimation so we know what we've got to deal with.
So I'm not sure that I could directly answer that question. I'm about to avoid it. There's a possibility that some solutions might be totally commercial and don't need any funding. Great. Some might be a good idea that needs some funding to trial. When we haven't got any set budget for a pilot, there's money set aside to support if we need it, but clearly one that's going to run and be self-funded is a really good idea because they're expecting a lot of people on it, great. But, and that would be a perfect solution, a really good solution. But so it depends on how good the idea is and how much it needs support to develop. And so there is no set fund per pilot. And certainly people who can bring ideas that have creative ways of getting help in funding is going to be part of the value mix. Is that well avoided? So the reason for allowing you to submit a number of options is hopefully we're creating an opportunity for you to take some risks. Put some out. You might have an idea that is a more conservative one as a base. Give us your risky one as well. Treat it as a way of getting some ideas out there that we can really look at. So we're trying to think through if people are a little bit scared to trial something out there, do it, but do it as an extra one if you're worried about it. But please, give them a go.
In from SMRT. Question is, maybe this is a hard one that you might want to avoid. Would you be providing some kind of marriage introduction service? In a sense that I can see across this whole hall here that there are different companies with different capabilities. Not all are fleet owners, not all are fleet operators.
Yep.
So is it conceivable that come late January when you are receiving proposals that you'll be picking and choosing the best service providers, say for technology, for fleet operations, and then try to marry them? What are your
Can I avoid that question to the next slide? Okay. And then I won't avoid it anymore. I'll go through it in the next slide, but I'm going to cover that. So then if you've got any questions from there, we'll come back. Okay.
Hello, I'm Mark Hilden from Datacom. Just a follow-on question. Are there any restrictions to apart from market competitiveness, any restrictions to the fares or the rates that citizens might need to be charged for those services? And I guess the other question is, what do you see Transport's role in terms of once a pilot is put up, in terms of endorsing the pilot and providing, I guess, marketing support and encouragement for people to use that as an endorsed transport system?
So we don't want to limit the opportunity for commercial solutions or partly commercial solutions, so that allows freedom on some freedom on fares, obviously limited to what other people charge in the market. So we don't want to limit those options, but it doesn't mean that some options aren't public transport fare options. But the possibility of commercial is, and Transport has some examples. Transport has a contract for Manly Fast Ferries where the fares were set by Manly Fast Ferries, and so they've got experience with working with companies to have a fare structure. And so, as I said before, a commercial solution is a good solution and one worth looking at. We will look at it. So just a few things on the evaluation criteria. They're not weighted. I've mentioned a few things. Yeah, we're looking for interesting ideas. Innovation will clearly be a key. When we're evaluating, clearly in the long run, we're looking for things that get people increased patronage, get people to use services. We will be measuring through the process what customers think about the process. So we're really interested in their satisfaction levels and how the pilots can help us do that. Better ways to link community. I think I've covered most things through the questions. But key here is give us a few ideas and take some risks. And we'll have a look, and we'll take some risks too if we see something good. So, interactive co-design of pilots. We didn't want to just nominate what people have to do. We want to allow people to work together. Part of this co-design process is that I'm sure there's people in the room that can't deliver the end-to-end process. But there's people who can work together in the room to deliver an end-to-end process. We're providing lunch at the end for people to get together. These interactive processes, if people have an idea and they'd like to try and link, we will try and link people if we can. And so we're trying to provide an environment to allow ideas to emerge and allow people to participate. And we're trying to develop them together to co-design a process and a pilot that will work. And so we understand that there are people with parts of a good part of a solution, but a good one, and how we can get together. So we're trying to develop ideas, get together afterwards, but also, as I said, in these things, if we can see people who are looking to, might be a good mix, then we will try and help them get together. We won't get involved in that getting together, but we'll try and help people get together so they can deliver that sort of service. So the co-design is about developing what it'll look like and what that pilot would look like and how we would actually contract that, how things like IP and that would work, how the solution would be measured. So one of the key challenges, I think, in this process will be the data that we generate from the pilots and how we measure the success of the pilots as they go. And so working through some of those, we'll be looking for the successful pilot operators to really help with that, but certainly measuring success of pilots is going to be quite a challenge, particularly when the impact is probably a long-term impact and we need to try and assess it. So,
hi, Pete. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Pete, John King from Premier. In the pilot, and putting your proposal through for the pilot, say, for the Illawarra, would you have 2 or 3 different types of scenarios running at one time?
So it's possible that they would be, you would expect them to be different pilots. We will be trying to get a spread of geographies, and we'll be trying to get a spread of ideas. So whether there could be 3 in one area is probably unlikely only through numbers, but certainly it'd be good to get 3 ideas that are good ideas for there to have to choose from.
Pete, just Darryl from Bus New South Wales. Could you comment on the regulatory environment that will prevail? Generally, you've got the 2 sorts of regulatory environments emerging with point-to-point and also the bus operator accreditation scheme on driver authorities and vehicle standards, and is there a thinking about that?
So generally, we will have to comply with the regulatory standards, and we'll have to work with people to how that happens, and things like using bus stops or how that works. The standards of the vehicles, we'll expect them to meet the requirements, and we'll have to work with people to do that. So this is not meant to be a point-to-point solution, but there's links between the two, and there's links of how they link together that could mean they merge, but we'll have to comply with regs to do that. And we'll have to look at ways we can help, and Transport will help work through those and how they operate. And just for example, where can services stop and pick up? And what sort of requirements are there on a bus? So their DDA compliance and things like that. So those sort of things we need to address.
Driver requirements?
So they will have to be, if it's more than a 12-seater bus, they have to meet the regulatory requirements. 12, is that right? 12, I think. So. So if you haven't signed it, then there is one. Yeah. So yes, we will be, and if you haven't signed the list, it's where? Is it downstairs still? It's still downstairs. So there's a list downstairs, make sure you sign on. Oh, good. Dorothy Dixon. Okay, so that process is going to be quite challenging. We're looking to start that around mid-January. Clearly, these are meant to be one-on-one sessions. These are meant to be working with people who are interested to develop ideas. That could be a challenging process given the interest we've got, which is great. So part of the challenge will be trying to define those and work through those. And we're going to have a team of people working, and potentially with a lot of meetings in January, to refine those ideas. But our thinking at the moment is they'll start mid-January and we'll work from there. We'll try and get them done in January if we can. Might be a bit of a challenge if we get lots of responses, but that'd be a good problem to have, quite frankly. Okay. Pilot options, I think, probably already covered this quite comprehensively. We're looking for a number of pilots. We're looking for some general ideas. I think we've already covered it, unless there's any particular questions further on it. I think we're okay. Question earlier got to this. So we're looking for the initial pilot to be awarded for 6 months, but then up to 3 more 6-month extensions might be possible as we refine. We're envisaging that pilots might be refined and tweaked as we go to see what really works and what doesn't. Okay, and some might not work. We don't know. So we want the flexibility to work through that and really work on the ones that look to be promising and keep developing them so we can work through. Part of the measurement of this will be in 6 months measuring the long-term success of driving patronage will be quite a challenge. We'll be really looking for people to give us ideas on how they think that will happen. I'll come to, the next slide, I'll come to some marketing issues and stuff. So operators, we're looking for, I think as Tony mentioned earlier, the more the end-to-end solution that covers everything, the better. And so we're looking for an operator who can come with the whole process if possible. So one of the things, just in terms of linking the previous slide and this slide and how things work, one of the challenges of this will be driving patronage quickly in a pilot. So clearly there'll be marketing and community liaison and getting out there and making sure people know it's available and how to use it, and that'll all be very important. And then when we're assessing the success of the pilot, we'll have to separate the success of marketing from the success of the pilot once it's up and running. and how people actually perceive it when it's going. So there's quite a few challenges in a short time frame in working through what's working. And so clearly good marketing strategies and good strategies of community work to get people to use service is a really good lesson, but also then we want to know, once people are on it, are they happy with it, and is it the sort of service that has legs that people are going to keep using and grow? You know, it might take 7 years to grow a service in the long run to get people out of cars or whatever, but we need to make some decisions fairly quickly. We'll be looking for operators to really give us some good ideas on how we might achieve that as well. We've obviously got our own thinking on it. So I think in terms of operator responsibility, we're looking for the end-to-end. We want the service planning, the marketing, the customer education. We'll be there working with you, and there'll be limits. We'll be managing parts of those processes with you. But the more you can deliver the end-to-end solution, then the better it is to run a pilot quickly. So we'll have some measurement criteria and some measurements that we'll want to run, but again, we're looking for the solutions. The idea is to suggest ways that they should be monitored and measured as well. Because I think data and data management and how that works and how we monitor will be a critical part of this process. Okay. Basically, we're looking for operators to bring everything to the table if we can to run the service. No questions on that? Sorry.
In terms of measurement criteria, is there a priority for increasing of patronage or profitability? If, for example, you have a service which is profitable but with very low patronage, I mean, it's not.
So
it's a bit difficult, but
for a pilot to be successful, you would think that if it's not growing patronage, then it's doing it cheaper than the alternatives. But we would hope that we think the future of this is better service, so better patronage, because the focus of this isn't to save money, it's to offer a better service. But clearly, an option is that if we can deliver services in those low patronage areas that's just more efficient, then we'd be willing to look at it. But I imagine that we're going to be looking at improving services in a very cost-effective way. And growing patronage is critical, but how we measure long-term growth of patronage will be a challenge. So a couple of things that Transport will manage any media statements through the process. The data coming out of the EOI and the measurement will be Transport's. We'll be running pilot check-in processes and looking at how things are running and developing them. And clearly we'll be doing the evaluations. Okay, but effectively, as much as the operator can do to run it, great, we don't want to get in the way. You've probably all seen the data room now. As I mentioned before, the reason for the confidentiality is just some of the data we've put in there is controversial. We're putting in data that's not been available freely before. And we will keep putting data in there. We're going to try and get some good road data in there so people can see what's happening around. Just remember, we're looking at a pilot for a whole lot of people who don't travel. So our data tells you who is travelling, it doesn't tell you who's not. So you've got a whole lot of work to do there to look at that. I know I'm probably telling you to suck eggs, but we're trying to get people out of cars and that sort of process. So they're not travelling at the moment, we need to know those as well. But certainly we've given you a lot of Opal data in some extremely large files, and we've allowed it in a format where you can manipulate it how you like to find out what's actually happening out there and see where there's opportunities. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. So hopefully that's helpful. But the reason for the confidentiality is that. So we're trying to keep this as open as we can, but we do have certain limits. there's an opportunity for you to send questions to the data room. Questions will generally be answered to the world. We won't say who asked the question, but they will form an answer for the world, unless there's some reason you've asked a question that only relates to you for some reason. Okay, and they'll be managed through the data room as well. And you've all, as I said, I'm pretty sure you've all accessed that probably. Okay. Timing, I think we've all touched on it. So clearly, if we're going to get responses in February, we've all got to move pretty quickly. And if we're doing interactive sessions in January, the timeframe's tight. But the idea is to try and award contracts in May so we can get going as quickly as we can to get the pilots operating as quickly as possible. And then that allows us to start getting evaluation information to inform contracts that roll around very quickly. And clearly there's a lot of thought to go into how they would impact new contracts, particularly if it impacts a broader network than just the specific services a pilot does. So there's a lot to do after it, and so the reason for this tight time frame is to fit in with a longer term immediate strategy of getting services operating in Sydney in a better way in the next turnaround. Okay, so we know it's tight, we know it's a challenge. We're going to give it a go, and we'll get there.
Hi, Bibiana Smith from McDonald. First of all, I think it's great that Transport are doing this, opening it out and calling for ideas. I guess the challenging thing for a lot of us, particularly those of us who don't actually run the services, is what's been touched on before, our intellectual property and the time it will take for us to develop these proposals. For a lot of us, that's where our value is, and there's sort of obviously no payment at this stage. Maybe that's a question for later, how we deal with that, but also, is there scope to start the discussion with Transport before the Christmas break, given that I think it's probably the longest time a lot of us will have a break, and it's good thinking time. So, are we able to sort of start, I guess, even just discussing ideas, or at least saying, well, what about this as opposed to this other idea?
I don't want to get in the way of developing ideas, and that's what the interactive sessions, clearly one of the reasons for the interactive sessions is to help people develop those sort of ideas and how they can fit in. But certainly, if you have questions, you can certainly put them in the data room, we can consider them. It might be a challenge to do too much before mid-January. But let me take it on notice as well, and we'll think through what we can do. But it might be a bit of a challenge. But let us have a think about it, and we'll get back to everybody on that.
Nick Abraham from the New South Wales Taxi Council. 2 questions. If an idea looks like it might be piloted, will there be any consultation or transparency with existing providers? So we use the example in Wollongong, if something was to be piloted, would there be any consultation with potentially other providers that are operating in that area?
So part of the pilot, if you look, is to talk about how the pilot communicates with local community, and that includes anybody else. So part of the solution we're looking for operators to do is to make sure they inform and, together with Transport, inform and let everybody know what's happening and how it works. So yes, there will be a process of of engagement with stakeholders and community as part of the pilot.
And the second question is our friends in country and rural area. You mentioned this project is for the Greater Sydney Metro. However, is there a plan, understanding that there's a very different market and the way things operate in country and rural areas, is there a plan to, whether it be a separate consultation running alongside this current timing, or is that something that's going to be considered for later?
So one of the major reasons it's excluded from this one is there's already a process in place looking at a few pilots in rural and regional. So because that process had already started, we're doing Sydney and outer metro.
Thank you.
Okay, so a tight timeline, but we know, and the challenge for us that we've set up for ourselves has made it hard on ourselves as it has on you. With no structure, we're going to get a whole lot of proposals to evaluate in a very short time there. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think if it's a challenge, then it's a good result because it means we're getting some good ideas. Measuring performance, we've probably covered most of this in general. Clearly we're interested in patronage and people's uptake. We're interested in what passengers perceive to be the success of it. We want to know how they're operating. And I don't mean as in a punctuality like we're going to have a KPI in, like we have in a service at the moment. We're trying to understand the ability to meet those things because at the moment we don't know if a flexible system works where you have bookings and then you have bookings on bookings, say, what impact that has on services and punctuality and how that impacts customer perception. So the more people you book onto a service, maybe you delay it, what does that do? So trying to really understand the end-to-end process and how those things work in the real world of you get a call to someone and you're already running something near there, you then divert it. How does that actually work? So we need to understand the impacts of all of those and what are the best measures for the success of this sort of process. Is it availability? Is it punctuality? What is it that is the right measure? Service quality and project management point. So we'll be looking to in the proposal for how the success of the pilot will be reported, and we'll be looking for ideas on that. Okay, so pretty comfortable with that. We'll explore payment options. We're happy to explore creative options, commercial, semi-commercial. Well, it's not Opal, not limited to Opal, it's not Opal. Clarify. And I would expect that if we're offering a standard type public transport type solution, then it's probably standard fares. If we're going to charge a different fare, it has to be a separate, something different about the offering. So think about the way the fare structure should work and why it's different and what the appropriate fare is. Because people are going to compare it to the fare they pay for the service they get today.
Pete, John from Premier again. Just on that question though, what sort of measures are you looking for to actually collect the payment and to be able to report the payment fare? So you're talking about you're going to have a fare section that with minimum fare levels, I suppose. If the taxi's $40 and I go and buy a fleet of Mercedes-Benz cars and I'm going to be $20, how do I actually manage that fare back to transport?
So is your question the logistics of getting the money back?
Or the reporting of the fare revenue?
Yep. So the solution should include the fare solution. So how you're going to collect fares and manage fares is part of the solution. And the way the fares work is part of the solution of how it's paid for. So if you're going to charge $20 and it's a popular service, then that'll be part of the funding of the process. So there'd be that agreement to work through. So depends, is it commercial, semi-commercial, how is that going to work? And is Transport helping to fund it, or is it just going to run on its own? And but we expect the operator to come with the ticketing fare solution. Just to let you know, we are being monitored for probity reasons. We're trying to be as free and open as we can within fairness rules, but we still have to be fair, and we will be. We're going to be fair to everybody who participates. And as I said, we've put this in to make sure there's a clear someone watching, someone who you can contact, and we'll get your contact details. So someone's here today watching us. And but it is important, we want you to know that we're going to be fair and equal to everybody and provide. So we're being very flexible and we're allowing lots of options, but we're still going to give everybody the same opportunity. And that's what probity will do, is make sure we commit to deliver what we said we would in the document that we've published. Okay. So that's the end of my bit. Are there any sort of further questions relating to anything generally that we haven't covered, or anyone want to explore anything further that we have?
Peter, hi. Jan Ross from Bico Electric Bike Share Solutions. I'm just curious, obviously one of the criteria is about increasing patronage on existing networks. How will we, as pilot ideas, be able to monitor what you're doing and whether that patronage is actually increasing?
Are you talking about the measurement of the data? So
yeah.
It depends totally on where that's being monitored. So if an operator is bringing a solution in, then we will need them to monitor patronage, and we'll need to work together to how we know that's right. So if somebody's doing a link of, say, bringing a bike to a system, how are we going to know that that's increasing patronage here? And we'll be looking for people to monitor that. And we'll have to work through how that works, because from the experience we've had, there's quite a few interesting ideas on how you can get people to public transport other than with a bus. And so we need to be open to those sorts of things, but we'll need to work through how we know how many people are actually using it. And so we'll have to work together on that. But we don't have any monitoring. We have monitoring systems. We have ticketing systems, but we'll expect the ticketing system that the operator brings to measure how many people are using it, because it won't be the transport system. So we'll have to set up processes for that. Data's going to be a big thing. Quite an interesting challenge. Okay, one more.
Thank you for this presentation, opportunity to be here today. It's very good to see the government is thinking future and challenge the status quo and existing situation. My name is Alan Krlic from SMEC, Transport Planner. I have a few questions to clarify the whole scheme and whole process. First, the measuring the success of pilot and the measurements which you listed here. There's no any measure looking on the indirect wider network benefits, like shifting from the car driver mode to the public transport mode share in certain areas, as like a wider network indirect impacts. And that's not on your objective for evaluation. Is it pilot successful? Can shift the transport mode share more towards the public transport other than car driver?
If you look at the document, you look at the detail of the objectives, mode change moving from car is one of the things we do mention. So we are interested in those things, and we'll have to work through how we measure, but we can only measure people using our system. And so we'll be looking to ways to do that with pilots. So it is something we're very interested in.
Measuring the traffic flows on certain roads where we're expecting the mode shift to happen or something like that?
It's probably unlikely that one pilot's going to have a noticeable impact on a traffic flow. So we'll have to be, I think, a bit creative in how we try and assess the potential impact. The other thing too is what we can't impact. One of the major problems you have in when we try and design incentive schemes in Sydney is when you do one thing, someone else does something different. And so if you get people off car, it doesn't stop other people getting onto cars. So we need to be careful that we're measuring what we're doing.
In terms of if pilot description and idea has incorporated hardware and software technologies in, how much detail are you expecting for us to describe those technologies which will be implemented into the pilot, like hardware and software components of the solution?
So we need to know that it's a system that we can use and will work, but we're worried about the outcome and the solution. We're not telling people how to do things, so we want to know what it will do for us, and we want to know if we need to know the platforms and how it will integrate into the system. Don't know if there's anyone from a technology area here, but our process is to look for a solution that in an outcome way will deliver what we want, and one that will be mature enough to work, or know when it will be mature enough to work in the broader context. Because I'm guessing some people might have systems that work in a pilot sense but might not be ready yet in the big sense, and so working through that will be critical. But we're not here to tell people how to solve it. We're here to say, we're here to understand what it is you're going to do, and so, great, and that's what we'll expect it to do.
Okay, thanks for that. But for a company like SMEC, which is a multidisciplinary engineering company, which has the transport planning, are you expecting from participants to run the pilot and do the logistic and the full know-how completely from the idea to the implementation? Or we are just on the idea space and then we will be running in partnership with Transport New South Wales?
So the more complete the pilot is, the better. So we're looking for solutions that deliver the whole thing. It's better for us if we get a solution that has the full suite and the measurement and the ideas that go with it to how to measure it. We will participate, we want to help, but the more complete the solution, the better. And as I've said before, this process is about understanding the impact in the long run and working through that. We're looking for operators to help us do that.
So you're expecting from us to organize the drivers, the whole thing,
yes,
the management and the logistic, everything? But what if the solution, if idea is in the line that use the existing state buses and logistics depots and centres and the vehicle infrastructure and everything, is that possible to partner in that way, or you just want to be completely independent and running separate?
So, sorry? So I think it's something worth exploring, but we'll come back to you on that, about how it would impact on current. So we're certainly interested in ideas that work in the current environment, but how that would operate in the pilot sense, we'll need to get back to you on.
Yeah, okay, and just last one, sorry, for the data provided, the list is the Opal data, which is definitely valuable information. But how about more detailed census data, which we know that Sydney is divided on travel zone system and all those census data aggregated on the zone level, which is in some area very large. Is it possible to obtain detailed journey to work data from census on the street level?
So, yeah, okay, yeah, so I'm happy to give it.
So there are a number of other data sources that are going to be available to you through the Open Data portal. And if you're looking for other data sources, then that would be the place to go. Transport Performance and Analytics, as they're now called. Previously, the Bureau of Transport Statistics can provide you data that you think might be useful. If it's available and it's open, put your request in and we will do our best to provide you with the data. But understand, we'll probably want to understand what the use and purpose of it is, because we're not kind of going to be able to spend a lot of time just going and finding lots of data unless we understand that it's relevant to a particular trial that you want to run. Unless, of course, it's open data and generally available, and then we'll help you find it. I just wanted to say a couple of things. I was sitting there quietly listening to the questions, and congratulations, Peter, for having the courage and the fortitude to kind of answer everything on the run. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to kind of point out to you or highlight from what I've heard today. First of all, DDA compliance. Peter and I and our colleagues, we're not the experts on this, but we do in Transport have experts, and we will consult with you on any DDA issues that you have and seek their views. My view as a layperson and as a leader in the organisation is that for a trial, DDA compliance won't be a necessary precondition, absolute compliance, but you will have to be clear about how, if scaled up, this would meet all of the obligations of that Act. And I realise that I might be saying something a little bit stretchy there, but in the spirit of us stretching you with your concepts and ideas, you are here too to stretch us and say, well, here I've got a great concept or an idea, but in actual, if I'm going to make this work, then these are the things that we need you as Transport to do. And I put my answer, or my thoughts, Darryl, particularly on your questions about the regulatory environment, is we have a very clear regulatory environment. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort has gone into establishing that environment, but the regulatory environment is designed to deliver an outcome. Now, Innovation New South Wales, which is also a new government initiative, there's a website up with that name, has set out very clearly what New South Wales government's policy now is on innovation, and they bring forward the concept of a regulatory sandbox, which for those of you that haven't kind of heard that phrase before, is in effect creating an environment where under certain conditions there can be a waiver or a variation of an existing regulation. Now, very clearly that's subject to a full and thorough risk assessment, and it's done only in very specific conditions. But if it's a regulation or a rule that Transport for New South Wales has that you think, if varied, could actually give us a really great outcome or a solution, then please put it to us and stretch us, right? We will take it to our colleagues. We will explore a regulatory sandbox if that's appropriate. And someone asked a question about marketing support. So again, you know what our marketing assets are. Fundamentally, your product is your first line always in marketing. But if there are some channels of communication that you think would be beneficial to your pilot, then again, I'd say in the spirit of stretching us, do stretch us. Put your proposals to us and stretch us. And finally, in the space of intellectual property, none of us here are lawyers, and I'm not going to attempt to do any bush lawyering. But if you think that you've got some genuine intellectual property there, you've seen that we have a process with probity. Government exercises caution in these things. Talk to us and seek for your experts in IP to talk to our experts in IP. But be aware the spirit of this is actually to create and foster new ideas. That if we start a big, heavy, robust conversation about IP up front before anyone shares anything, then it's probably not going to meet the objectives of the pilot and the trial. So I'd be encouraging to rely on the principles of fairness and transparency in the probity framework, as opposed to coming at us with some heavy-duty IP stuff. That said, during the process of negotiating a contract for a trial, obviously sitting down and talking about IP will be a sensible part of that conversation. So I think those are probably the final words I wanted to say, but again, to reinforce two things. Number one, stretch us by all means in your proposal. Tell us everything you can do, but tell us what you might need us to do to enable that. Clearly, there is a balance for both sides of the investment and effort for the potential reward that is here. And that would be my final word, is remember, this is a pilot. Our opportunity here is to trial and experiment with new things that, if they demonstrate themselves to be successful and offer the right customer value proposition and a value proposition to government overall, then there is a big opportunity there to scale up. So do keep that in mind. We're not just doing a pilot for the fun of it and because we like to stretch ourselves. There's a real opportunity to be at the frontier of changing the way that transport services are delivered in the state. Anyway, that's my final unscripted 5 cents worth. I'll hand you back to Trish to wrap up. One last question.
Yes, it's working now. Hi, Kim Thomas from Oricon. one of the things I think we're all grappling with is the financial model around this.
Yep.
And how we're going to manage to make this workable as a pilot. One thing I noted was the very high subsidies that the existing bus services get. Now, if you're looking at rolling out a competitive service in the same, perhaps corridor or something like that, is there a possibility we could make the assumption that we will be able to get similar subsidies for the services we're looking at providing?
So government's always very focused on value for money. Peter did an artful job of avoiding any talk about dollars and cents, and I'm going to follow his lead on that. The moment that we say to you, oh, we've got X dollars, you'll find a way to help us spend it. That is not the purpose of this exercise. The purpose of this exercise is to generate better transport solutions that we have today, and clearly within that there is a service provision part of it, and there is a value equation, the cost to government and the cost to the customer. A small-scale pilot is designed to test and explore those and understand the real-world impacts and effects. And that's why we're saying there is funding available for pilots, but you need to kind of think about government's position and how that might improve with the concept of the proposal that you've got.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you to Peter. I think we can all agree that this has been a really robust and healthy information session. Obviously, there's a lot of hunger to talk more offline, and we do have lunch provided, great spread downstairs near the coffee shop. I'll also note that there was a lot of hunger for people to get in touch, so please leave us your email, because we will be emailing out details of how we can put you in contact with one another. So on that note, I think we'll wrap things up, and thank you so much for coming today.